Okay, to go through the bill, the first part of it, we have the Dream Fund. Can you speak about, is there any overhead that's spoken to in the bill? So as far as overhead goes, when money's collected for student scholarships, do we know what percentage will go to the student scholarships? Is that addressed, or?
So as far as the fund is concerned, the fund is a separate entity that basically will be charged with fundraising, public funds, private funds, in order to allow for scholarship monies to be available for these students. There isn't right now a projection for overhead costs. The commission, which establishes the fund, is charged with coming up with those procedures.
Okay, thank you. And in 2012, I think that was a standalone bill and enjoyed widespread support as something with private funding to ensure that students get that information. So now the second part of the bill is the DREAM Act part.
Yes.
So the Section 3 of the bill repeals the current eligibility right now, which says that a person's either going to be a citizen or a green card holder, a permanent resident, or a refugee. And expands it to include that awards for undergraduate tuition and graduate tuition be extended in addition to those groups to this is the bill's text, lawful non-immigrant aliens, which is anybody on a visa, and then an applicant without lawful immigration status. That's correct, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Then when we go further in the bill, we're talking about academic eligibility. So under the bill, am I right that a person who's eligible for funding either attended a registered New York State high school for 2 years and graduated from that high school, and then they have to apply for the undergraduate award within 5 years or graduate award within 10 years? That's the first part, right?
Yes, correct. 5 years after graduating from high school in New York State or receiving their GED, they would be able to apply.
Right. So, and the second part, as you just mentioned, so somebody who has received a New York State GED. So, which would be, to get a New York State GED in the state, you need to be a resident for at least 30 days and then complete a GED test. Or someone who's lived in the state for 30 days or has 24 college credits as a specification of what kind of credits they need. So, okay, so we have that thing for the academic eligibility. The next section in the bill, Section 6, states that the residence of a student, so it goes in, it talks about, this is for somebody who is a resident of New York State. It would go based on where they live for the majority of the year. Or it talks about somebody who does not have state residence. It says, and further provided that an applicant who does not have a residence in the state but is eligible for an award for either the undergraduate or the graduate funding shall be deemed to reside in the geographic area of the institution where they're attending for geographic purposes. That's correct?
Can you repeat the last part?
Sorry about that. So on this part, if you don't have a residence in New York State, it's going to be based on where you're living when you're attending college for the purpose of the award.
I don't see the thing.
So yes, correct. In order to determine the eligibility requirement for college, for community college payments.
Okay. And that's also SUNY and CUNY, right? Just
Yes.
Okay. All right, thanks. So now, over the last several years, we've always talked about how much additional funding will be needed. I remember last year, and I think the year before, it was an additional $27 million for the TAP funds. Is that still the estimate?
Yes, 27 million.
Do we have an estimate for how much additional in the Excelsior? I saw, I think, 80.
Give me 1 second.
I think it'll be minimal.
87 million, that's what I see, but I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, we expect for the increase to be minimal. Most of these students will qualify for TAP, which will cover, most of the cost for their education. As you know, the Excelsior Scholarship is a last dollar scholarship, so they will exhaust their TAP assistance
first
before they could reach into their the Excelsior pot.
Okay. Now, at a hearing that I attended in December, I believe SUNY and CUNY estimated that at the moment we have about and I could be wrong on this number if you have a different number, 8,300 students that are currently attending SUNY and CUNY who we estimate do not have currently legal status. Is that right, or do you have?
Well, in New York State, we've actually seen a decline in the number of undocumented students that are here and that are attending our higher education institutions. So that number varies between 6,000 and 8,000.
Okay, so that's about that. Now, a couple things that concern me on this bill for scenarios of people that we could have. So the first one, is it correct that under this bill, if we have a family who their daughter graduated from a New York State high school and they moved to, let's say, the state of Florida, and they lived there for 4.5 years, now because the family currently is not currently paying state income tax, that child would be eligible to apply for these programs when they move to, when they live on campus at a college, as long as,
So that is correct, but I do want to state that most of these students that we're talking about today and that we're addressing in this bill have made New York their home. They are New Yorkers. They've lived here. You must understand that for an undocumented person, they sometimes would potentially have to move out of state for whichever amount of reasons. And they could come back and under the requirements of the bill could apply if they fit all the other requirements of going to high school here and getting their GED for this benefit.
Okay, and now we talk about the GED provision. So under this bill, for the GED, there's no age requirement on the GED. So under this bill, we could have somebody who, let's say, is a 30-year-old who lives in the state of New Jersey. If they can move to New York, so say they want to go to Binghamton, live here for 30 days, take and pass the GED exam, we're considering them now a New York State resident. So despite that, to date, they haven't paid a dime in state income tax, they also would be eligible?
So once you're a New Yorker, you're a New Yorker. And if in 30 days they can manage to pass the GED exam, then they would be eligible for this benefit. But you must understand that the GED exam is not a fly-by-night exam.
Right.
Someone can't just pick up a book and pass the test. They would have to have had some sort of training, whether in high school or in an accredited GED program here, in order to pass that test. And that is difficult when you combine that with language access issues and other issues that we've seen in our communities as far as passing the GED exam.
Okay, so we'll take that now a step further. If we have under this bill, if we have, say, a student from Canada that is coming in to study at Albany University on an F1 visa, under this exam, now they could be, because the other part of the GED is if you have 24 credits, the state specifies what they have to be in, but you could have a sophomore at Albany University that's coming here from Canada, and under this bill, their residence is based on, since they're not a New York resident, their residence is based on living on campus. They too now could take and pass, I assume that they would pass the GED exam since they're a sophomore or a freshman in college.
Well, they would have had to not gone to an accredited high school or GED program in Canada. And if they're here and they are under the other requirements of this bill eligible for the benefit, then they would be able to access financial aid.
I think we really have to check that, because when I looked into the GED requirements, what it said is it specified that to take the GED exam, if you're a U.S. citizen and you received the high school diploma outside the state of New York, that you could not take that exam. However, it did not specify. It actually says for the GED application that they will not consider documents from other countries or in other languages. So potentially you actually could have somebody who, for this purpose, comes from, like, say, this example, they're a student visa and apply for TAP based on this bill. For the fact that they're residing at Albany, they now are granted a GED under that program. Is there anything that changes the requirements for the GED? Because right now, they would be able to take that test.
Well, to clarify, HESC, the Higher Education Services, would be in charge of those regulations. So HESC would be the agency tasked with verifying all of that information and documentation in order to grant access to the benefit.
Okay, and now another potential thing, down on Long Island near my district, we have a fantastic university, Stony Brook University. We have a great exchange program. So we have a number of students that, they may come from China, and if they're on an exchange visa, a lot of times their home country is actually paying for them to attend college here. Now, under this bill, isn't it possible that as long as they're not commuting every day from China, if they're living on campus, I apologize for making a joke of that, but if they're living on campus, they'd be granted in-state tuition, and then if they meet the qualifications for the GED, then they too could be eligible for TAP?
Okay, I just want to say that when we started the questions,
Yeah.
you specifically spoke about that number, those 8,300 you mentioned.
yes.
That was in 2012. Those were the numbers.
Okay.
These are the students that we're talking about here today.
Okay.
Under your scenario, we believe that HESC, who is the agency tasked with making sure that all the paperwork and all the documentation in order to receive the benefits are in place, that those regulations under HESC would take care of sorting out issues such as this.
Okay, because that's a concern presented the way the bill is worded. So now we go to who we're talking about today, as I understand it. As a teacher, these people were my students. You know, we're talking about, when we're talking about a dreamer, how I interpret it is we're talking about somebody who was brought to this country when they're a very young age. They may not have any connection to their native country. They may not speak the language. They may not even know a single person over there. And for all intents and purposes, they've grown up as a New Yorker here in this state. Is there anything in the bill that limits, that creates a requirement for them to live in the state for 15 years or 10 years or 5 years, any kind of?
There is a requirement in the bill for an affidavit that they will regulate their status once they have the opportunity to do so. But there isn't right now in this bill an enforcement mechanism for that affidavit. The bill doesn't speak to that. Again, HESC, as the agency charged, would be the one to follow up.
Okay, and I think that's an important distinction because with these funds, we're talking about TAP and Excelsior, they are conditional where if we run out of money, that's it. I mean, that's, you know, they're going to be basing that. So somebody who, under this bill, shows up in the state of New York at age 45, if they get a GED, if they pass their GED, they could have come to this country illegally under the way the bill's written, they get their GED. Now, after not paying a dime in state income tax, they too would be eligible. Now, so when we're talking about dreamers, I don't think that this bill really, is there any phase-in that we're talking specifically about people who were brought here when they were very young? That
This bill aims to increase that benefit, give access to that benefit to students who have made New York their home, who under this bill are eligible for the benefit. And we're talking about a group of students who, as I mentioned before, are New Yorkers, have lived in New Yorkers, for all intents and purposes, have paid taxes in New York. They pay local taxes, they pay excise taxes, they pay sales taxes, and some of them do pay income tax with their individual taxpayer ID number.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Del Rosso. Thank you, Mr. Moya. On the bill, Mr. Speaker? Okay, thank you to my colleagues for this. I know we've had this debate many years. I have a number of concerns on this bill. Right now, we have a student loan crisis in the state of New York. On average, our students, New York State students, owe about $31,000 in student loans, and that's 60% of our residents are dealing with that. So what we're talking about is every month having to pay $350 to $450 a month in student loans. And we're not really, to date, this chamber hasn't done anything to address that. Also, the limited funding in the TAP and Excelsior program, under this bill, it does not necessarily talk specifically about the dreamers. It's very broad in that we can literally have someone who is a resident of another state, a resident of New Jersey, someone who previously lived in the state, now lives in the state of Florida for almost 5 years, and also someone who comes to this country as an adult. They too would be eligible for this funding. So we're doing nothing on that end to protect this. This has no residency requirement that says you have to live here for 15 years or 10 years or even 5 years. That would then be exclusive to the dreamers that the bill is talking about trying to help. So the bottom line, the way the bill is written, I think that we should be concerned about New York State taxpayers and less concerned about taxpayers of New Jersey or Connecticut or Canada. And I think that this is a little too broad on that. So on that, I'll be voting no. But thank you.